Imagine for a moment you're living inside the largest financial experiment ever conceived in human history. An experiment so vast and complex that most people don't even realize they were a part of it. I'm talking about global debt. Public debt, private debt, family debt, corporate debt, a colossal mountain that has exploded to levels no civilization has ever carried before. Today, governments around the world borrow trillions like it's the most natural thing. Central banks create money with a few keyboard clicks, turning digits into apparent wealth. Families commit 30 years of their lives to mortgages with the same ease as buying groceries. And yet, we continue to talk about debt as if it's normal, harmless, and even permanent. But the truth is far more unsettling. Debt has always been a tool of power, a weapon of control, and a ticking time bomb waiting for the right spark. The real question we need to ask isn't if this current mountain of global debt will cause a crisis, but when, and more importantly, who will pay the price when the system inevitably resets? The current truth, a system working exactly as designed. Many of you, with good reason, look at these staggering debt numbers and think, this system is broken. And indeed, it seems broken for the average citizen, the small business owner, the family struggling to make ends meet. But what if I told you that from the perspective of those who truly hold power, the system isn't broken at all, it's working exactly as designed? This is an uncomfortable but essential truth. Throughout history, debt has been meticulously perfected to be an instrument of control and wealth concentration. It's no accident. With every crisis, every bailout, every new round of money printing, a pattern repeats. The powerful are protected, and the burden falls on the shoulders of those who have the least. This feeling that a game is being played, where the rules are made to benefit the few, is one of the biggest pains many of you express. And to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the very roots of debt itself. The ancient roots of debt. Grain, gold, and the need for a reset debt is as old as civilization itself. Thousands of years before Christ, on the plains of Mesopotamia, the first clay tablets didn't record poetry or philosophy. They were ledgers, detailed records of who owed what to whom, how many bags of grain, how many heads of cattle. In these early days, debt wasn't just an economic tool, it was almost sacred. Priests and kings oversaw these obligations, enforced them, and occasionally forgave them in grand jubilees, moments of redemption where all debts were wiped clean to prevent the collapse of social order. Imagine that. The idea that the survival of an entire society depended on pushing a financial reset button. Debt was power, yes, but too much debt was an existential danger. Ancient rulers understood something modern leaders seem to want to forget. You can't forever enslave a population with obligations. At some point, the system breaks. Jumping to the Renaissance, we see the rise of powerful banking families like the Medici in Florence. Debt evolved from grain and cattle to gold and, crucially, to credit. Kings and popes borrowed astronomical sums to fund wars, build cathedrals, and expand empires. But debt always carried an inherent risk. Spain, flush with silver from the New World, declared bankruptcy 4 times in the 16th century because the crown borrowed far beyond its means. That's the first great lesson. Even empires stuffed with gold can drown in debt when ambition overtakes reality. Debt was no longer just personal, it became geopolitical. It fueled wars, toppled dynasties, and redrew maps. The point of no return, the origin of infinite debt, and the mistake of 1913-1971. The explosion of modern debt, the one that truly brought us to where we are today, began in the 20th century. And many of you, correctly, point to specific moments as the inflection points. After World War I, nations carried debts so massive that repayment seemed like a fantasy. Germany, in particular, was crushed by reparations from the Treaty of Versailles. Obligations so overwhelming that economists at the time warned they would destabilize the country, and they were right. The hyperinflation of the early 1920s, when Germans pushed wheelbarrows full of paper marks just to buy a loaf of bread, was a direct consequence of debt obligations that couldn't be met in real terms. That catastrophe left scars so deep it shaped the politics that led to World War II. Debt wasn't just an accounting problem, it was the fuel for chaos. Then we arrive at 1944 and the Bretton Woods Conference. This was the moment the modern world's financial system was meticulously designed. The United States, emerging from the war with 2/3 of the world's gold, dictated the rules. The American dollar became the anchor, convertible to gold at $35 an ounce, other currencies pegged to the dollar. The idea was to create global stability to prevent the violent swings of the interwar period. But the reality was dependence. Every nation's debt, every government bond, every economic calculation now rested on the promise that the United States would maintain financial discipline. For a while, it worked. But the temptation to borrow, to spend beyond one's means, never goes away. By the 1960s, with the costs of the Vietnam War and domestic programs piling up, the United States printed more dollars than it had gold to back them. Foreign governments noticed and began demanding gold in exchange for their paper dollars. In 1971, Richard Nixon slammed the door shut, ending the dollar's link to gold. At that moment, debt was untethered. Governments were free to borrow and print at will, limited only by trust. For many, this is the true point where we lost control. The foundation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, 6 months before the outbreak of World War I, and the subsequent uncoupling of the dollar from gold in 1971, are milestones that, with good reason, spark concern. It's as if the first penny borrowed in excess of the gold that backed it did indeed break the system, as some of you observe, starting a countdown to infinite debt. The silent revolution, rates, bailouts, and debt as a manipulated system. That moment in 1971 was the silent revolution. It transformed debt from something finite into something that felt infinite. Without a gold anchor, central banks found they could manipulate interest rates to control the economy. When growth slowed, lower rates encouraged borrowing. When crises hit, more debt was created to patch the hole. Every bailout, every intervention required more leverage than the last. The 1980s saw massive public debt expansions under leaders like Ronald Reagan, justified as necessary for defense or economic reform. Developing countries took on heavy loans from Western banks, triggering the Latin American debt crisis when they couldn't pay. The pattern was set: use debt to seek prosperity, only to drown when the tide receded. The 2008 financial crisis was not, as many still believe, simply about mortgages. It was about debt upon debt, a pyramid of leverage so vast that when a single corner collapsed, the entire structure trembled. Mortgages were packaged into bonds, sold to investors, insured with derivatives, and amplified by 30-to-1 leverage. The collapse wiped out banks, annihilated retirements, and forced governments to step in with trillions in bailouts. Here was the bitter irony, and something many of you feel deeply. Those who lent irresponsibly were rescued, while ordinary citizens were left with unemployment, foreclosures, and austerity. Debt was revealed not as a neutral instrument, but as a system architected to protect the powerful. The pain of injustice was palpable. Many of you saw the system fail the common person, but work for the giants. Since then, the numbers have gone from alarming to surreal. Global debt has tripled in the last 2 decades, hitting over $300 trillion in 2023. To put that in perspective, it is almost 4 times the size of the global economy. Governments, corporations, households, everyone has piled on more and more debt. Some nations like Japan now carry public debt levels that exceed 200% of GDP. The United States adds trillions every year with barely any debate. Emerging economies borrow in foreign currencies, exposing themselves to sudden collapses when interest rates rise. The entire system has become a giant balancing act where stability depends on the illusion that debt can expand forever with no consequences. The inevitable end of debt. Inflation cuts and the price you pay. But debt always has consequences. It distorts behaviors, it creates bubbles, it transfers wealth, and most importantly, it enslaves future generations. Every dollar borrowed today is a promise of future work, and when the numbers get too big, repayment becomes impossible. That's why history is littered with defaults, restructurings, inflations, and crises. Debt always ends in one of three ways. You honestly pay it back, you inflate it away to decrease its value, or you default. No empire, no system has ever escaped this truth. The current consequences are all around you, but most people don't see them because debt has become invisible. Think about it. When your government runs a deficit, it doesn't knock on your door and ask for money. It issues bonds, sells them to banks or foreign investors, and silently creates a debt in your name. When you swipe a credit card, you're not paying, you're borrowing. When corporations announce record profits, often those profits are fueled by borrowed money used to buy back shares and inflate the value of their own companies. The system thrives on leverage, but leverage works like gravity. It feels light on the way up and crushing on the way down. The entire financial system today is floating on promises that may not be kept. Take the United States, the anchor of the global system. Its national debt has surpassed $34 trillion in 2024. That number is so big it has become abstract. But let's translate it to reality. Every American taxpayer is carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in obligations. Interest payments alone now rival defense spending. This means the world's greatest superpower is borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. And this isn't unique to them. Across Europe, debt-to-GDP ratios remain well over 100% in countries like Italy and Greece. In China, the debt explosion has been hidden in local governments and state-owned enterprises, creating hidden liabilities that may be far larger than the official numbers suggest. Everywhere you look, debt has spread like a cancer. The trap is psychological as much as financial. Politicians love debt because it buys them time. Raising taxes angers voters. Cutting spending angers them even more. Borrowing, however, feels painless. Future generations will deal with it. The illusion works until it doesn't. When interest rates rise, the burden suddenly becomes visible. This is exactly what we've seen since 2022, when central banks worldwide raised rates to combat inflation. Suddenly, the cost of servicing debt skyrocketed. Governments faced tighter budgets. Households faced higher mortgage payments. Corporations saw their refinancing costs explode. Debt is like a sleeping predator, harmless while it rests, deadly when it wakes. And yet, even as the risks mount, debt continues to be sold as a path to prosperity. Students are encouraged to take on tens of thousands in loans for degrees that may or may not pay off. Families are told to stretch to buy homes they can barely afford because real estate always goes up. Nations are told that deficits don't matter because central banks can print unlimited currency. This is the great lie of modern finance. The debt is free, infinite, and safe. History in block letters screams the opposite. What comes next and how you pay? Inflation as the preferred solution. What comes next isn't hard to guess if you've studied economic history. There are only a few escape routes when debt piles up beyond reason. One is inflation, to silently reduce the value of what is owed by devaluing the currency. This is already happening, and many of you feel it in your wallets. When prices go up 10%, your savings lose 10% of their purchasing power, but your government's debt shrinks by the same measure. It's a hidden tax, and it's politically easier than a default. The second route is restructuring, admitting the debt can't be paid and renegotiating the terms. We saw this with Greece during the Eurozone crisis, when bondholders were forced to take a haircut. The third route is an outright default, refusing to pay the debt. History is littered with sovereign defaults, from Argentina to Russia, each time unleashing turmoil. None of these options are painless. All of them are a way of breaking a promise. So, where are we heading? The signs point firmly to inflation as the preferred path. Central banks may talk about fighting it, but indebted governments need it. They need the erosion of real value to make their obligations bearable. And that means ordinary citizens. You will bear the cost. Your savings, your wages, your future purchasing power will be drained to preserve the system. It's the oldest trick in the book, and people fall for it repeatedly because inflation moves slowly, because the numbers are abstract, because the system trains us to believe debt is someone else's problem. Your pains, your solutions. How to protect yourself in a world of infinite debt. But here is the final, most important insight. Debt isn't just economics. It's about power. Who lends, who borrows, who gets bailed out when things fall apart. The financial system is designed so that when debt becomes unbearable, the powerful rarely pay. Banks are rescued. Corporations restructure their debts. Politicians retire. Ordinary people, meanwhile, lose homes, jobs, and hope. That's why understanding debt isn't just financial education, it's survival. If you don't see the trap, you will live inside it without realizing you're shackled. For many of you, the feeling that the system is rigged against the common person is overwhelming. But there is a way to protect yourself, and it starts with knowledge. Debt as a manipulated system, new slavery. The solution isn't to fight the system itself, but to become a conscious player. Understand that debt isn't neutral, but a tool. The best defense is your financial independence. Minimize your own debt, especially consumer debt. Frustration with bailouts and impunity. It's true that the powerful protect themselves. The solution for you is not to wait for change from the top, but to build your own resilience. Stay away from overly leveraged investments and focus on assets that bailouts can't erase. Historical origins of losing control. Understanding the inflection points, like 1913 and 1971, is crucial. The solution is to use this historical perspective to anticipate the future. Watch for the signs that debt is growing unsustainably and adjust your financial strategies proactively. Uncertainty about the future and imminent consequences. The uncertainty about a crash or future inflation is real. The solution is diversification and wealth preservation. Invest in assets that historically appreciate during inflation, like real goods or even physical gold and silver, with proper research and caution. Don't have all your wealth in a single form of fiat currency. Desire for untaught knowledge, financial education. This is the most powerful point. The solution is continuous education. The system may not teach this in schools, but you have the power to seek out this knowledge. Become a student of economic history, personal finance, and investment strategies. Your knowledge is your greatest weapon against manipulation. So, what should we do? First, strip away the illusions. Understand that debt is not neutral. Every borrowed dollar has consequences. Second, recognize the historical pattern. No empire, no nation, no system has ever escaped a reckoning with debt. The timelines vary, but the destination is always the same. Third, protect yourself. This doesn't mean panicking or burying gold in the backyard, but building real wealth that isn't entirely at the mercy of paper promises, assets that hold value through the cycles, knowledge that unmasks the lies, perspective that keeps you from falling for the same old tricks, because the system will keep repeating them. This is history's lesson. Debt piles up, leaders deny, crises erupt, and societies reset. The only choice you have is whether you face this cycle blindly or awake. If you understand the traps, you can avoid becoming its victim. If you don't, you will pay for mistakes you never made. The global debt isn't just a number on a spreadsheet, it's the shadow hanging over our future. And unless we learn, it will crush us the same way it crushed every empire before us. If this analysis of global debt has given you a new perspective and the urgency to protect your financial future, click subscribe to the channel right now and hit that bell, because history holds the answers, and I'll show you where to find them. True financial freedom isn't about getting rich quick, but about understanding the game and playing it wisely.